Hello designers! In this tutorial I'm going to show you some tips and tricks for passing the InDesign 2020 certification test. I recently took it, scored an 850, so I think my tips and tricks will help you to ace the simulation question section of the test. If you don't have access to the practice files that I'm showing you here because you're not my student, don't fear. All you have to do is go to New File and create some document from scratch and add some content such as images and text to that document so that you guys can practice some of the steps that I'm about to show you. If you are my student, use your practice files so that you guys can follow along. The first thing I'm actually going to show you guys has to do with object styles. One of the questions you can expect to see on your certification test has to do with creating a new object style and applying that object style to a number of different items on your document. So what I'm going to do to open up my object styles panel is to go to Window and Styles, and I'm going to select Object Styles from the menu options. And then to create a brand new object style, I can either do so by clicking on the horizontal bars on the top right corner of the panel and select New Object Style, or I can click on the shortcut at the bottom of the Object Style panel that has a little plus sign on it. Either one, you'll create an object style. So you can see the style was created. It's listed here, it says Object Style 1, so I'm going to double click on it so that I can edit the properties of it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name this object style. I'm going to call it Fancy Frames. And then I'm going to go and under the basic attributes, I'm going to click on Fill and I'm going to select a color fill. So I'm just going to randomly select magenta, but on the test they're going to give you a specific fill color to use, and that's the one that you guys are going to select. Having selected the fill, I'm now going to go and click on stroke, and I am going to select a stroke color. So I'm going to select blue and maybe increase the weight. So I think I'll go and make the weight, I don't know, 3 points. Again, you guys are using the properties listed on the question itself. And then I'm going to select stroke and corner options. And under my corners, I gotta make sure, by the way, that this little icon for the links is actually selected so that each of the corners will change automatically. And I'm going to select the fancy corner option, and I think I'm gonna select a radius, pixel radius of about 14 points. And you can see that because they're linked, each of the corners are linked, each of them will now be the same radius. And now I'm going to click OK to save those changes. To apply the Fancy Frames object style to each of these rectangles, I'll need to use my selection tool and either drag a marquee to select them, or I will need to hold down Shift and click on each of the rectangles. Either way is fine. And then click on the object style named Fancy Frames in order to see those frames changed with the attributes that I created for that Fancy Frames object style. And that should pretty much show you guys how to create a brand new object style and apply it to a set of shapes on your document. So remember to make sure that when you guys are creating the attributes of the style, it reflects whatever the test is asking you to do. So don't make it up. Use whatever they are specifically telling you to do. Another question you may expect to see will have you modify an existing object style so that it will have different attributes or different effects. So here you can see that I have two objects. I'm going to click W to go into preview mode, and you can see that the objects have been changed with an object style that has a drop shadow, and it does have a really thin stroke around the frames. To go and modify the object style, I will need to go and click on the Object Styles panel. So I'm just going to expand it. And I can see that these objects have a style called Pick Style applied to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select them. And then I'm going to click on Pick Style so that I can modify some of the settings. So the modification is asking for an inner shadow or an inner glow, or either of these kind of different effects. Let's say that the modification is asking to get rid of the stroke, so I'm just going to go and deselect stroke. There was no corner option added, so let's say the modification asks you to add a corner option. So all of these are modifications that you can make to an object style. You can either get rid of some of the general attributes, some of the effects, or some of the corner options that you can add to any given object style. So for the modifications, I'll just get rid of the stroke, so no stroke. I'm going to get rid of all of the effects. And the only modification aside from getting rid of the effects and the stroke that I'm going to make is adding a different frame, a different corner for each frame. So I'm going to select the rounded corner for each one. I'm going to leave the radius as is, and I'm going to scooch this panel up. Click OK. And you guys will see if you click W to preview, the changes that are being applied having made those modifications. So I no longer have the drop shadow, I no longer have the straight corners, I have the rounded corners, no drop shadow or any other effects to speak of. Okay, so several of the questions on the cert test also asked you guys to edit layers and select specific layers, reorganize specific layers, delete certain layers. So you have to understand how layers work within InDesign. The first thing we need to do is make sure our layers panel is open. So if it's not listed on the layers on your right hand side, you can go to Window and Layers. And you can see that right now I have one layer called monkeys, and if I click on that monkeys layer by clicking that little arrow, there's several different objects that are contained inside of the layer. So layers within InDesign are similar to layers within Illustrator in that the layers can contain multiple objects. What I want to do here is I want to organize the content of the layers into different categories. So there's two images that I downloaded from Pexels, and they are reflected here under the monkeys layer, so the two Pexels images. And then there's two objects which are basically text boxes, and they're reflected here as well. And I want to put the two images on their own independent layer. To make that happen, I'm going to create a brand new layer. So at the bottom of my layers panel, I'm going to click the new layer icon that looks like a plus sign. And I'm going to double click on the layer name to name it. And I'm going to call it Pictures and click OK. And then I'm going to basically go and select the two picture objects by holding down Shift and clicking on each one. And then dragging the pictures to the layer called Pictures. And you'll see when I click on the arrow to expand it that those pictures are now contained in the layer with the same name, so that when I turn the visibility of that layer off, the pictures are invisible as well. To rename this layer called monkeys, let's say I'm going to call it text, so it's a little bit more obvious to me what it is. I can just double click on the layer name to rename it, and I'm going to call it text and click OK. So you can expect to see several questions that will have you guys create new layers, reorganize layers, and definitely label layers on InDesign. As far as your InDesign layers are concerned, you'll also expect to see questions that are going to have you distinguish between several different layers in any one given document so that you guys can create layout content in the document. Here's what I mean. I have my layers panel expanded, and I can see I have two layers that are created in this document already, one a graphics layer and one a text layer. If I expand the text layer, I can see the text layer has the words "Hey dudes," and then the graphics layer is like totally empty. So what I want to do is I want to use the space in this document, the empty space here, so that I can grab the frame tool and I can fill this space with two frames to fill with content. So I'm going to make sure I click on that graphics layer, and I'm going to use my rectangular frame tool And because I have several guides, I'm just going to go and align my frame tool with the guide as I drag. And as I create those two frames. If you need to resize it because clearly my math was a little off, you can always just use the selection tool and just resize the frame as needed so that it aligns with your guide. But now if I go and expand that graphics layer, I can see that those rectangular frames are now reflected in it. So always whenever you guys are working with layers on InDesign, make sure that you guys have the correct layer selected and expand the layer so that you guys can see the content or the objects that are contained within that layer. So I'm going to do yet another question having to do with layers. So I'm going to keep the layers panel open, and you can see in this case that I only have one layer, and it's called layer 1, and contained within the layer in this file is a text box and 3 images. You guys can expect to see a question on your certification test that will have you group the images and then name the group within the layer. So let me show you how to group the images first. What I want to do is I'm just going to close my layers panel temporarily, and what I want to do is use my selection tool and shift click each of the images, and I know they're selected because I can see that blue outline around the images. And then I'm going to go to the object menu and select group. So now the images have been grouped so that if I wanted to, I could move them basically as a whole instead of each individual image. I'm just going to Control Z to put them back in their original position. Now the last part of the question would be to name the group. To name the group, I'm going to go to the layers panel, and I can see when I expand layer 1, the group was already created, and the group contains the 3 images of the desserts. So what I'm going to do is to name it, I'm going to double click on where it says group, and then I'm going to type in the name. So I'm going to call this group desserts so it's more easily identifiable. And now the layer contains the group as well as the text file. Now let's talk about another panel that you can expect to use a lot during your certification test. I'm referring to the Pages panel. If your Layers panel is already open, you can just flip to Pages. Or if neither is open, you can go to Window and Pages. And with the Pages panel, we can basically add pages to our document. We can edit the spread of our document. We can add master pages to the pages in our document. So we can do quite a lot of things within the Pages panel. One of the questions that we can expect to see on the certification test is one where they're going to ask you to add a certain number of facing pages. Because I already set up this document to have facing pages, all I basically need to do is add the pages and ensure that they're in spread format. To add pages, you can just go to the top right of the Pages panel and select Insert Pages. And then you can insert however many the test is asking you for. So I'm going to assume they want me to insert 25 pages. And now I want to make sure that it's after my cover page, which is the one that says knock knock. If you wanted to, you could also select different areas to insert all of those pages. So at the beginning, at the end, before certain pages, and so forth. And you can also, of course, select if you want the master page to apply to those pages or not. Right now, I'm just going to assume yes, so I'm going to click OK. And you'll see that once I click OK, 25 pages were added in facing page format to my document. I recall one question in particular that was driving me crazy. because I knew how to do it, it just gave me such a hard time while I was doing it during the test. And the question basically had me swap the content in 2 of the pages while still maintaining the facing pages. What I mean by that is, you can see one page in this document says cupcakes and tea parties, and one page says ice cream sundaes. So they wanted me to swap the content in page 3, in this case, with the ice cream sundaes, and put it where page 2 is. So doing a little switcheroo. Let me show you guys how to do it. So your pages panel needs to, of course, be open. And what you want to do is you want to select the page that you want to swap. So I'm going to double click within the pages panel on page 2 and click in the page on the pages panel and drag. And you can see as I'm dragging, it kind of has this little cursor of what appears to be a hand holding a piece of paper. And when you let go, you should have seen them swap. Did they? No. This is why I struggled so much during the cert test, because I know that's how you do it. It's just tricky. So let me show you again. I'm just gonna go double click and drag. Okay, there we go. Now it did it. So you can see that the content was kind of swapped. So on page 2, I now see the ice cream sundae content, and now on page 3, I see the cupcakes content. It's going to take you guys a few tries, possibly, when you guys are trying to do that question on the cert test. My suggestion is that you guys reset the question until you can get it right, which is what I did, until finally I got it to swap the way that I knew I could, and just try your best until you finally get it. Let's talk a little bit about the preflight panel. Every now and then you'll notice at the bottom of your document it will give you a little message telling you that you have some kind of error. This is our preflight panel, and the preflight panel basically checks for mistakes that may pop up that will somehow inhibit your printing or displaying of the document you're working on in InDesign. In this case, I can see what the error is without even opening the preflight panel. I can see because of this little box at the bottom of the text box telling me that the text is overset. However, one of the questions that you guys will have is asking you to correct some of the errors that are shown in your preflight panel. So I'm going to show you guys how to open it. We're going to go to the bottom of our workspace, and we're going to click preflight panel to expand it. And now you'll see that there's several different profiles. If you guys go and expand the profile menu, I'm gonna actually go and select one called Alice, because I know on the test they wanted me specifically to select a specific profile from the listed menu. And Alice is telling me that my text is overset, which I already knew. So to fix that error, I can just basically go and do one of several things. I can expand that text box. In fact, I'm just going to use my selection tool and expand the text box to fix the error until the text is no longer overset. Or I could literally just go and click with my selection tool on the overset text, and you can see it loads the text, and I can just place it elsewhere on the document until the text is not overset anymore. You know that you fixed the errors because at the bottom of your workspace you should see a message saying no errors. The test doesn't really care so much how you do it, just the fact that you're actually getting it done. Unsurprisingly, there were a few questions having to do with text, and one of the questions that I distinctly remember had me convert some of the text to outlines. One of the reasons that you would convert text to outlines is if you're sharing your file with another designer and that designer doesn't necessarily have the same font installed to their computer, so that they don't have to go and convert the font. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this text, Welcome Freshmen, to outlines, and I'm going to go and use my selection tool to click on it so it's selected. And then to convert it to outlines, I'm going to go to the type menu, and I'm going to select Create Outlines. And you'll see that now that the outlines are created, each letter form has like a blue outline around it, and I could basically go and edit this similar to how I would a shape within InDesign. It's no longer a type layer, so I can't, for example, change the font. I can't, for example, delete the exclamation mark in the same way that I would a type layer. So I would need to go back and Control Z so I could go back and fix it before converting it to outlines. You can also expect to see 1 or 2 questions having to do with interactive documents, and there was one question distinctly that I remember having to do with placing a hyperlink on a piece of text. So here's what I want to do. I want to place a hyperlink on the text that says PHS Design, so that a person who could go and open my interactive PDF could click on the hyperlink and it would take them to that website. So I'm going to go and select the text, and I'm going to go and open the interactive panel by going to Window and Interactive, and I can go and select from the interactive options, so I'll select hyperlinks. And now the test will give you some kind of URL address to link to. I'm gonna go ahead and make it up. I'm gonna just type in, for PHS Design, I'm gonna type in adobe.com and click enter. And you'll see that the hyperlink has been added, and I can preview it by clicking on this little green circle to go to the URL. And if for whatever reason the link was inactive, you would see a little red circle telling you that you need to fix it. I do recall the question specifically had me add the hyperlink to the text and then convert the text to another style. So to show you what I mean, I'm going to open up my character styles. I'm going to go to Window, Styles, and Character Styles, and I can see a style called PHS has been added to this block of text to make the fill of the text red and have an outline of blue. So no doubt on the test you'll have several different styles to select from, but I'm just going to go and click on None, and you'll see that the text has been converted to an entirely different format. So remember, when you guys have those 2-part questions, to do a little mental checklist as you're doing the test and making sure that you guys are completing each of the requests within any one given question. So I'm going to finish off the video talking about 2 questions having to do with Pathfinder, and these were very surprising to me because the tasks reminded me of things that I would do in Illustrator, not necessarily on InDesign. But they were on the test nonetheless, so let me review them with you just in case. So one question specifically had me create like a crescent moon from a logo that was created out of 2 ellipses. And the idea was to select the ellipse that was on top of the black ellipse so that I could create the look of a crescent moon. So again, it's kind of like a drawing related prompt. I'm not sure why it came up on the InDesign certification test, but just in case you see it, here's how you do it. You have to select both ellipses, so using your selection tool you can drag a marquee to select them both. And then to find your Pathfinder options, you would go to Objects, Pathfinder, and I'm going to click Subtract, and you'll see that when I subtract, the black ellipse has been cut into, and it just kind of resembles a crescent moon, which was very distinctly the prompt on the certification test. I can't seem to get that one out of my head. The last question that I recall having to do with Pathfinder had you merge 2 shapes to again create what looked to be a very basic logo. So in this case you can see that I have a pentagon and a rectangle overlapping, but I want them to be one united shape. So to make that happen, again, I'm going to use my selection tool, and I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to go to Object, Pathfinder, and I'm going to click Add, so that now you can see it's just one unified shape. Again, very strange questions for the InDesign test. So I hope that's been helpful to you guys. and that you guys score very well on your certification test. Remember, you need a 700 minimum in order to pass. Hit me up if you have any questions in the comments, and I wish you guys the best of luck. Peace out.